Mr. and Mrs. Smith married 30 years ago, and they have lived in the same house since then. Mr. Smith goes to work at 8 o'clock every morning, and he gets home at 7:30 every evening, from Monday to Friday. There are quite a lot of houses in their street, and most of the neighbors are nice. But the old lady in the house opposite Mr. and Mrs. Smith died, and after a few weeks, a young man and woman came to live in it. Mrs. Smith watched them for a few days from her window, and then she said to her husband, "Bill, the man in that house opposite, always kisses his wife when he leaves in the morning, and he kisses her again when he comes home in the evening. Why don't you do that too?" "Well," Mr. Smith answered, "I don't know her very well yet." Bill likes football very much, and he often goes to matches in our town on Saturdays. He does not go to the best seats because they are very expensive, and he does not see his friends there. There was a big football match in our town last Saturday. First it was very cold and cloudy, but then the sun shone and it was very hot. There were a lot of people on benches around Bill at the match. Bill was on one bench, and there was a fat man on a bench behind him. First the fat man was cold, but then he was very hot. He took his coat off and put it in front of him, but it fell on Bill's head. Bill was not angry. He took the coat off his head, looked at it, and then smiled and said, "Thank you, but where are the trousers?" Mr. and Mrs. Jones very seldom go out in the evening, but last Saturday, Mrs. Jones said to her husband, "There's a good film at the cinema tonight. Can we go and see it?" Mr. Jones was quite happy about it, so they went, and both of them enjoyed the film. They came out of the cinema at 11 o'clock, got into their car, and began driving home. It was quite dark. Then Mrs. Jones said, "Look, Bill, a woman's running along the road very fast, and a man's running after her. Can you see them?" Mr. Jones said, "Yes, I can." He drove the car slowly near the woman and said to her, "Can we help you?" "No, thank you," the woman said, but she did not stop running. "My husband and I always run home after the cinema, and the last one washes the dishes at home." Mrs. Peters had 2 children. Sammy was 7 years old, and his sister Annie was 4. Sammy went to school, but Annie did not. When Sammy was at home, he often played with Annie, while their mother was cooking or washing or cleaning. And he was usually very nice to his small sister, and Mrs. Peters was free to do her work quietly. One Saturday morning, the 2 children were playing in the garden while their mother was cooking the lunch. They were quite happy until Annie suddenly began to cry and ran into the kitchen to her mother. Mrs. Peters stopped cooking and said, "Why are you crying, Annie?" "Sammy's broken my toy horse," Annie answered, crying more loudly. "How did he break it?" her mother asked. Annie stopped crying but did not answer for a few seconds. Then she said, "I hit him on the head with it." Len was 30 years old and he had very long hair. He lived in a big city, but one year he did not find any work there. So he went to a small town and began looking for work there. He went to a lot of places, but nobody wanted him. Then he met an old friend, and this man said to him, "People in this town don't like long hair. Why don't you go to a barber? He can cut a lot of it off, and then you can get some work." Len went to a barber and said, "Please cut most of my hair off." The barber began. He cut and cut for a long time. And then he said to Len, "Were you in the army a few years ago?" "Yes, I was," Len answered. "Why did you ask that?" "Because I found your cap," the barber said. Jack worked in an office in a small town. One day, his boss said to him, "Jack, I want you to go to Manchester, to an office there, to see Mr. Brown. Here's the address." Jack went to Manchester by train. He left the station and thought, "The office isn't far from the station. I'll find it easily." But after an hour, he was still looking for it. So he stopped and asked an old lady. She said, "Go straight along this street, turn to the left at the end, and it's the second building on the right." Jack went and found it. A few days later, he went to the same city, but again he did not find the office. So he asked someone the way. It was the same old lady. She was very surprised and said, "Are you still looking for that place?" Dave worked in a factory, and he always made sandwiches in the morning, took them to work, and ate them at midday. Then he married, so he thought, "Now my wife's going to make my sandwiches." On the first day, she made him some, and when he got home in the evening, she said to him, "Were the sandwiches all right?" "Oh, yes," he answered, "but you only give me 2 slices of bread." The next day she gave him 4 slices, but she said again, 4 slices aren't enough. The third day she gave him 8 slices, but those were not enough for him either. So on the 4th day she took a loaf of bread, cut it in half, and put a big piece of meat in it. In the evening, she said to him, "Was your lunch nice?" "Oh, yes," he answered, "but 2 slices of bread aren't enough." Nat lived in a small town in England. He always stayed in England for his holidays, but then last year he thought, I've never been outside this country. All my friends go to Spain and they like it very much. So this year I'm going to go there too. First, he went to Madrid and stayed in a small hotel for a few days. On the first morning, he went out for a walk. In England, people drive on the left, but in Spain, they drive on the right. Nat forgot about this, and while he was crossing a busy street, a bicycle knocked him down. Nat lay on the ground for a few seconds, and then he sat up and said, "Where am I?" An old man was selling maps at the side of the street, and he at once came to Nat and said, "Map of the city, sir."